In my family, there is a moment every woman over 70 is handed a piece of paper and told to sign. Someone slides it across a table with a pen already uncapped. Someone else stands nearby at an angle that is not quite hovering but close enough. And the paper is never explained in full, just the headline of it, just the part they need you to understand, because the rest, they have decided, is above your head or beneath your notice, and they have never been sure which. This is the night I refused, not the night they handed me a piece of paper. They never handed me anything. That is the part that took me a few weeks to understand fully, to turn over until it stopped surprising me. I refused a document I was never shown. Let me start where I always start, at the beginning that matters, not the beginning that's convenient. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of afternoon where the light comes in sideways and makes everything in the kitchen look like a photograph of itself, a little golden, a little still, the counters and the dish rack, and the window over the sink, all holding their shadows at an angle you only see a few times a year. I had the back door cracked for the smell of it, cold coming off the grass, wood smoke from somewhere nearby, the particular sharpness that arrives in the air just before the first frost, like the season clearing its throat. I was making the turkey stock I start every year at that time, bones from the church potluck the weekend before, a habit I'd had since 1987 and had no intention of stopping. The kitchen smelled like thyme and bay leaf and something deeper, and something my husband Gerald used to call the smell of the house deciding to be warm again. Gerald had been gone 4 years by then. I was standing at the stove with the wooden spoon in my hand and my mind in approximately 7 places, the way it tends to be when a task is familiar enough to run itself, and I had the radio on low. Public radio, some program about birds, which I had been listening to with increasing frequency since retirement, and could not have explained to anyone why. And that was the moment my phone rang on the counter. I dried my hands on the dish towel. The blue one, the one with the small burn mark near the hem from a grease accident in 2019, that Kendra always said I should throw away. I have kept it deliberately since she said that, not out of spite, out of the belief that a dish towel does not need to be perfect to do its job. I answered the phone because it was a number I recognized. First, Federal Savings and Loan, the branch on Millbrook Road. Not the main branch, not the downtown branch where I had worked for my last 11 years before retiring. The Millbrook Road branch, where I had spent my first 22 years. Mrs. Renner, the young man said, and his voice had that particular practiced flatness that tells you someone is reading from a script and hoping you won't notice. A quality I recognized as my own, once, on calls I made to customers in my early years, when I hadn't yet learned to make the script disappear. We're reaching out as part of our standard courtesy verification on a recent application. Is this a good time? I turned the stock down to low. I set the wooden spoon on the rest. A verification on what application? I said. A small pause, the kind that sounds like a hand being placed over a receiver while someone 2 feet away is consulted in a whisper. We have a business loan application that lists you as a co-signer, Mrs. Renner, for Renner Callaway Creative Partners, LLC, in the amount of $90,000. I did not say anything for a moment. There was only the low sound of the stock simmering, a single bubble coming up through the surface and breaking quietly, the way they do when the heat is exactly right. Can you read me the submission date on that application, Owitioin? I said. He read it. October 9th, 12 days prior. On October 9th, I had been in Dayton, Ohio, at my sister Marguerite's house, helping her sort through 40 years of her late husband's woodworking tools, planes and chisels and squares that hadn't been touched in a decade, organized with a carpenter's precision, in a garage that still smelled of sawdust and linseed oil even now. I had driven the 4.5 hours myself because Marguerite doesn't ask for help easily, and I know to show up when she does. I had the hotel receipt from the Super 8 on Edwin Moses Boulevard. I had the tolls recorded on my EZ Pass. I had a photo on my phone of Marguerite and me at the Cracker Barrel, off IY-70, time-stamped 6:47 in the evening, both of us squinting, because the young woman at the host stand held the phone at the wrong angle and neither of us corrected her because we were too tired and too full of roast beef to explain. I was not in this county on October 9th. I had not been anywhere near this county on October 9th. A third grader with access to my phone's photos and my EZ pass records could establish this in under 4 minutes. "Thank you," I said to the young man at First Federal. "I'll need a few days before I respond further, but I want you to note in the file that I'm aware of this application. Can you do that for me?" Another pause, a longer one. "Yes, ma'am, I can note that." "Note the time as well," I said. "And your name, please." His name was Derek. Derek wrote it down, or I assume he did from the sound of the keyboard. I thanked him, and I hung up. I stood at the stove for a minute or two after that. I put the wooden spoon back in the pot and gave the stock one slow turn. I put the lid on, slightly ajar, the way Gerald taught me. He had been a better cook than me in most things, though I never admitted it while he was alive, and I carry a small, persistent regret about that particular omission. The lid clinked softly against the rim of the pot, a sound that is one of the quieter sounds of domestic life, the kind you hear 10,000 times without registering it, until one day it stops. The steam found its gap and curled up toward the cabinet. I knew the name Renner Callaway Creative Partners, LLC. I had known it for about 4 months at that point, because Kendra had mentioned it at Sunday dinner in June, the way you mention something you want to seem casual about, with a lightness in the voice that is ever so slightly performed, that sits a few millimeters above where natural ease would sit. She and Lou had been talking, she said, about starting a graphic design and marketing business together. Lou Callaway had been doing freelance design work for a few years, logos, branding, packaging, that kind of thing. And he had built a small but solid client base, the kind that comes from word of mouth and doing good work without cutting corners. Kendra had some marketing background from her years at the Hendricks Group, before they downsized their communications department in the restructuring, and she had kept up with her skills in the time since, taking courses online the way she does when she sets her mind to something. It was, on its face, a reasonable idea. Lou has this thing he does when he's excited about something. He leans forward over whatever table he's sitting at and taps the surface with 2 fingers. Not hard, just rhythmically, like he's keeping time with his own thoughts. He did it that Sunday in June, tap, tap, tap against the white oak table that Gerald built the spring of 2004. I remember the spring because Gerald was retired by then, and he'd started on the table in February and finished it in April, and the table has been in this kitchen for over 20 years, and I still run my hand along the edge of it sometimes, the way you touch something that was made for you. Lou talked about the gap he'd identified in the local market, the clients he already had lined up, the studio space they were eyeing on Carver Avenue, a former print shop with high ceilings and good light, and a landlord who was willing to negotiate the first year of the lease. Kendra watched him the way she watches him when she's already made up her mind about something, and is waiting for the conversation to catch up to the conclusion she reached on the drive over. There is love in that look. There is also something that functions like management, a kind of directing from the passenger seat. But I have never said that to her because her marriage is hers and not mine, and I have known couples where the person who appears to be driving is not the person doing the navigating, and that arrangement is not always as lopsided as it looks from the outside. I told them it was a solid concept. I told them to get a good accountant before they touched anything else, before they signed a lease or opened a business account or made a single promise to a single client, because the bones of a business are in its books, and you build the bones first. Lou said they were already talking to someone, a woman named Heather who had done the books for 2 of his freelance clients. Kendra refilled my water glass without being asked, which is what she does when she's pleased with how a conversation is going, when she feels that something she wanted to happen is happening. Nobody asked me for money. Nobody mentioned co-signing anything. Nobody mentioned a loan at all. That was June. This was October. And somewhere in the 4 months between that Sunday dinner and October 9th, someone had decided that asking was unnecessary. I need you to understand something before I go any further, because what I am about to tell you about what I did and did not do requires some context about who I am and where I have spent most of my adult life. Not for sympathy. You don't need to sympathize with me. I need you to understand the specific shape of the knowledge I was working with, because the knowledge is the whole of it. I started at First Federal Savings and Loan in 1980. I was 24 years old, and I had a degree in business administration from Ohio State, and a husband who worked in manufacturing and a daughter on the way. And I started as a teller, because that is where you started, and I worked my way through the positions the way you did then, one at a time, which meant that by the time I was a loan officer, I had processed more transactions, reviewed more applications, sat across the desk from more human beings in moments of financial vulnerability than most people encounter in 5 careers. I knew what a good application looked like. I knew what a desperate one looked like. I knew what a fraudulent one looked like. I had referred 6 applications to the bank's compliance department over the course of my career. 6 in 33 years. Because I was not someone who called wolf, and when I called it, I was right every time. I understood lending from the inside of the machine, not the customer's side of it, the machine's side. This is the knowledge Kendra grew up adjacent to. She didn't absorb it in any technical sense. She wasn't interested in it, in the same way the children of plumbers are rarely interested in pipes. But she understood its presence. She understood that her mother was a person who knew things about documents and institutions and the weight of a signature that most people her mother's age were not expected to know. She understood this because I had, over the years, been occasionally useful in ways that required it, helping her navigate a lease dispute in her 20s, reviewing a contract before she signed it in her 30s, steering her around a predatory financial product someone tried to sell her in her late 30s when she was newly divorced and not entirely herself. She knew what I knew. She had benefited from it, and so she also knew. She had to have known, because she is not a stupid woman, far from it, that if she brought a business loan application to me and asked me to co-sign, I would treat it the way I would treat any application. I would ask for the business plan. I would review the projections. I would ask about the collateral. I would ask about the personal credit history and the business credit history and the market analysis and the cash flow model. And I would sit with it for a week and come back with questions, and if the answers weren't satisfactory, I would say so, clearly and with reasons, the way I had said so to hundreds of strangers over the course of my professional life. And she was not certain the answers would be satisfactory. That is the honest truth of it. She was not certain, and she needed the money, and she found a way around the uncertainty. So she didn't ask. She signed for me instead. I went to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed that evening after dinner. I had eaten alone. The stock turned into a soup I seasoned carefully because eating alone is no reason to cook carelessly, and with bread from the loaf I'd made on Sunday. And I lifted the top of it by the brass hardware Gerald had chosen specifically because he said it would outlast both of us. He was right. The cedar smell came up as it always does. That sharp, clean smell that never fully leaves cedar no matter how many years pass over it, and I breathed it for a moment before I reached inside. Gerald made that chest the spring before the table, 2003, from cedar boards he ordered off a pallet and dried in the garage for 6 months, because he was not a man who trusted shortcuts with wood. You can still see, if you look at the corner joints, the precision of the cutting. There are no gaps, no filler, nothing to compensate for an error. The chest fits together the way things fit when the person building them knew what they were doing and refused to pretend otherwise. I keep my important papers in a divided file box inside the chest. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would impress anyone. The deed to the house, the trust documents that Gerald and I drew up in 2011 with the attorney from our church, a straightforward revocable trust that we'd had reviewed twice since then. My pension documents from First Federal's retirement plan, the homeowner's policy, Gerald's death certificate, which I should probably move to somewhere more practical, but have not been able to move yet, for reasons I don't examine closely, and in the back section of the file box, held together with a binder clip and a rubber band that I replaced every couple of years, a folder of carbons and copies from my banking years, statements, verification forms, a few copies of applications I had particular reason to keep, with identifying information removed, purely as professional references, not sentimentality. Habit. The habit of a woman who had spent 3 decades watching people's memories prove elastic when money was under discussion. And I keep in that same back section a second folder, every significant document I have ever signed. Loan documents, lease co-signatures for Kendra in her 20s, the deed from 1994, the trust paperwork, Gerald's insurance payout form, our marriage certificate, the settlement document from the lease dispute I helped Kendra resolve. I did not start this folder with any particular intention. I started it in 1988 when a customer at the Millbrook Road branch brought in a claim that she had not signed a document she had clearly signed, and the dispute took 4 months to resolve because no one could find the reference signature quickly enough. I thought, I will keep my own, and I did. For over 30 years, I pulled the folder out. I laid several documents on the quilt. The deed, signed 1994. The trust, signed 2011. A loan document I'd co-signed for a modest home improvement line of credit in 2007, before Gerald retired. His life insurance acknowledgement from 4 years ago, which I signed with a hand that barely functioned properly that day. The pen shook. I remember it. And I signed anyway, because it was one of the last things I had to do for him, and I was not going to fail at it. I laid them all out, and I looked at them for a while in the lamplight. The quilt was the log cabin pattern that Gerald's mother made for our wedding, faded now to the colors of old photographs, rose and slate and cream. My signature has a quality that I have noticed and thought about over the years, with something close to professional interest. The capital S in Sylvia begins with a small hook, not a flourish, not a decoration, just a brief catch at the top of the stroke, barely visible unless you are looking for it. It is not something I was taught. It developed somewhere in my mid-40s and calcified, the way habits do, until by the time I was in my mid-50s, it was as consistent as any other element of my handwriting. Around 1998 or 1999, one of the younger loan officers at the downtown branch pointed it out to me when we were comparing signature samples on a training exercise and said it looked almost like a small musical note had settled into my S. I said I supposed it had. I went back to work and thought about it occasionally afterward, the way you think about something that illuminates a small corner of who you are, quietly, without urgency. After roughly 1997, that hook appears in every document I signed. Before 1997, it does not appear consistently. It is a record of time, not intention. You could look at my signature history the way you look at the rings of a tree and date it. Someone trying to reproduce my signature from memory, from the most recent samples they'd seen, a birthday card, a check, a form from 2 or 3 years back might, if they were careful, reproduce the hook. They would have seen it. It would be in their memory of what my name looks like. But what they would not be able to reproduce is the precise weight of the stroke, the slight leftward tilt that appears in the capital R of Renner, the way the final R trails without lifting, the total time the pen is on the paper, which produces a quality in the ink flow that a trained eye reads even from a photocopy. These things are not taught. They accumulate. They are the product of writing your name in the same way tens of thousands of times across half a century, adapting to different pens and different paper surfaces and different states of hurry or care, until what remains is not a shape, but a motion, that the shape is just the visible part of. You cannot reproduce a motion by copying a shape. I had known this since my 3rd year in the business, 1983, when I sat in on a fraud training session at the regional office and watched a document examiner demonstrate the difference between a genuine signature and a skilled forgery on a projector screen for 45 minutes. The shape can be reproduced. The motion cannot, not unless you have spent the same amount of time becoming the same person. I knew, without seeing the application, what would not be right about it. I could not know exactly how it would be wrong until I saw it, but I knew it would be wrong, and I knew that the bank's own handwriting review process, which I had participated in designing, in a small way during a compliance committee I served on in 2006, would eventually find what I had already found in my own mind. I put the documents back. I closed the cedar chest. I laid my hand on the lid for a moment. The wood was smooth and cool. Cedar cool. The kind of cool that is not cold. And then I went to bed. I did not call Kendra that night. I did not call First Federal. I lay in the dark in the house that Gerald and I had lived in for 31 years, and I listened to the house settle around me the way old houses do in the fall, the particular soft percussion of wood contracting against the cold, and I thought about what I was going to do. I was going to do almost nothing. Almost. Here is what 33 years of banking teaches you that no one puts in a textbook, that no one can teach you in a classroom or a training session, that arrives only through the years of sitting inside the process and watching it move. Institutions are slow, but they are thorough. They are thorough in the way that large machines are thorough, not because they are wise or compassionate or particularly interested in justice, but because their liability requires them to be. A loan at this scale, $90,000, small business, individual co-signer, does not close in a day or a week or even a month. It moves through layers. The application goes to a processor, then to an underwriter, then to a second set of eyes if the co-signer is of a certain age or income profile, which I am, which Kendra and Lou would have known to consider if they had thought to wonder about procedure, rather than assuming procedure was something that happened to other people's applications. Along the way, the institution does its own verification that has nothing to do with what the borrower wants or how urgently they need the capital. The institution does not feel urgency. The institution feels liability. The institution was about to do my job for me. All I had to do was establish, formally and on the record, that I was aware of the application, and then not interfere, and let 30 years of institutional thoroughness take its course. I called First Federal's main branch at 9 the next morning when they opened. I did not call Derek back. I asked for the branch manager at the main office. Her name was Patricia Osei. She had come into the system about 15 years after me, had risen through the same track I'd taken, had been the branch manager downtown for the last several years, before the main branch opened and she'd transferred. I had met her twice at retiree functions. Once at the anniversary dinner they hold in September. Once at a panel they'd invited me to participate on about women in community banking, which I had done on the condition that they not call me an inspiration. And they had honored that request, which raised my opinion of them. Patricia was precise. She was fair. She had the quality that the best banking professionals have of understanding that paperwork is not bureaucracy. Paperwork is protection. For the customer and for the institution, both. I identified myself. I gave her my former employee number, which I remember the way I remember my children's birthdays without effort, because some things that mattered enough simply stayed. I told her I had received a courtesy verification call the prior afternoon regarding an application listing me as co-signer on a business loan. I told her I wanted to go on record, those exact words, on record, that I had not submitted or authorized that application. I am not lodging a formal complaint at this time, I said. I am noting my position through whatever channel you recommend for documentation. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I heard the sound of a keyboard, a chair, adjusting. Mrs. Renner, I would recommend you send that in writing to our compliance inbox. I'll make sure it reaches the appropriate department. Will the application be paused in the meantime? Once a co-signer discrepancy is on file, she said, and her voice was careful in the way that banking voices are careful when they are telling you something true without making it into a promise. The standard process does require additional verification before the application can proceed. Of course it does, I said. I helped write that requirement. A small pause, and then something that might have been the beginning of a sound, almost a laugh, almost something, that she brought back under professional control. You were at Millbrook Road before downtown. 22 years at Millbrooks, I said. 11 years downtown. I thought I recognized the name from the files, she said. What was in her voice then was not quite warmth. It was something more specific than warmth. It was the recognition that passes between people who have spent time inside the same institution, who have sat with the same paperwork and made the same kinds of decisions and understood from the inside what the forms are actually for. I understood it, and I let it stand. I sent the email at 9:17. Plain language, no accusations, no emotional content, a factual statement. I had not submitted or authorized this application. I had received a courtesy verification call on October 22nd from a representative named Derek at the Millbrook Road branch. I was notifying the compliance office as recommended by the branch manager. I saved the sent confirmation. I noted the time in my own records. Then I made oatmeal and ate it standing up, looking out the window over the kitchen sink, and I watched the backyard go through its morning light the way it does in late October. Slowly, reluctantly, the frost burning off the grass by degrees, and I let the thing be where it was, The thing about Kendra, the thing I have known about Kendra since she was perhaps 11 or 12 years old, and it became undeniable, is that she is a person who solves problems before they have fully formed, and it is one of her best qualities and one of her most difficult ones to be around, because it means she is rarely in the same moment as the rest of the room. She is already 3 steps ahead of the problem, rooting around obstacles that haven't fully materialized yet, making decisions that she hasn't announced, because in her mind they are already made, and what remains is just execution. When she was 9, she planned her own birthday party in full detail. Location, guest list, cake flavor, because she was worried I would forget to do it in time. I had not been going to forget it. I had her party half planned already. But she didn't know that, and the uncertainty was uncomfortable enough that she resolved it herself rather than ask. She is like this about money especially. Money represents a category of risk she can see from very far away, and her response to financial risk is to move toward a resolution as quickly as possible, often before she has checked whether the resolution she has chosen is the right one. Lou is different from her in this way. Lou feels things at a delay. He'll be fine in a conversation, calm, engaged, even relaxed. And then you'll see, an hour later, something settle into his face, some thought that has been traveling from where it originated to where he feels it, and he'll go quiet in a particular way that means the conscience caught up. He is a good person in this sense. The catching up always comes. He doesn't outrun it indefinitely. He just goes far enough ahead of it to have already done the thing. I thought about both of them in the days that followed, more than was practical, more than helped anything. In the way you think about people you love, when they have done something that requires you to recalibrate the picture you hold of them. A slow, uncomfortable process, like adjusting your eyes in a changed light. I did not call Kendra. I did not raise it. I went about the days the way I go about them. The morning oatmeal and the news, the afternoon walk down Willard Street and back, the Sunday dinner I host every week, Carol Prieto from next door joining me as she had since August when her husband moved to the memory care unit, and I found that I had both extra food and extra room at the table, and she had neither. Kendra called me about 10 days after my call to Patricia. She called on a Thursday evening, her usual time, between 6 and 7 when she's winding down from the workday, but hasn't started dinner yet. Her voice was the voice she uses when she's performing casual, when she wants a conversation to feel light, but is holding it that way deliberately, the way you hold something fragile that you don't want to appear to be holding carefully. "Hey, Mom, how are you?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just finished the dishes." "Good, good." A breath that came out slightly too soon. "Have you been getting your mail okay? I know you had that thing with the mailbox over the summer." "The mailbox has been fine for 2 months, Kendra." A pause that stretched 1 second beyond a comfortable pause. Right. Good. How's the hip?" "The hip has been fine since February. I know, I like to check." Another small breath. "Okay, well, I just wanted to hear your voice. We'll see you Sunday?" "I'll be here," I said. She said goodnight. I said goodnight. I set the phone back on the counter and I kept my hand on it for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. She was listening for something in my voice. She wanted to know whether I knew. She was doing the thing she does when she is waiting for a situation to resolve, taking small readings, checking the temperature, trying to determine how close the storm is. I had done this myself, across a desk, more times than I could count, listening to the pauses in someone's voice for information about what they had not said. The difference between us in this instance was that I already knew what I was listening for. I was better at waiting. That is a skill, like any other. Sunday dinner a few weeks after that was 4 of us, Kendra and Lou, Carol, and me. Carol brought cornbread in a cast-iron pan because she always brings something, and she had figured out years ago that cornbread was the thing I never made myself, even though I always wanted it with certain meals. Lou brought a bottle of wine that was considerably better than the occasion technically called for. A Willamette Valley Pinot that he'd been holding on to for months, he said, that he'd been waiting for the right dinner. He said this, with his easy voice, his Lou voice, the one that is warm without being studied, and I noted that a bottle he'd been saving for months had arrived at my kitchen table on a Sunday in November without explanation. He poured it carefully. He handed me the first glass. "How's the house holding up?" he said, because Lou always asks about the house. It is not small talk for him. He grew up in a family where houses were maintained rather than replaced, where the skills for keeping things sound were passed down the way recipes are passed down in other families, and he brings genuine attention to the question every time he asks it. The house is fine, I said. The back gutter needs clearing before the leaves finish falling. I'll get someone out. I can do that, he said immediately, and he meant it entirely. I want you to hold that. Hold the fact that Lou Calloway, who had helped put my name on a document without my knowledge, genuinely and sincerely offered to climb a ladder in November and clear my gutters. Hold both things at once, because they are both true, and the person who did one was also the person who offered the other, and collapsing that into a simpler story would be dishonest. Most people who do damage are not simplified by it. They remain complex in the way that makes the damage harder to understand and also harder to stop being angry about. I appreciate that, I said, and I meant it, and we both let it sit as what it was. The dinner was good. Carol managed the conversation the way she does at my table. She has a gift for it, the kind that comes from a lifetime of teaching middle school science, of understanding how to keep 12 different minds engaged and directed, talking about her book club selection, a novel set in rural Portugal that she couldn't put down, and about the ongoing neighborhood situation involving the Hendersons' new fence, which had now officially gone past irritation and into something that might require the city's involvement. Kendra relaxed over the course of the meal, the way she does when a dinner is going well, her shoulders descending by degrees from wherever she carries them when she's holding something. By the dessert, I had made apple cake, Gerald's mother's recipe, the one that uses cardamom in a way nobody expects. Kendra was almost entirely herself, almost the Kendra who sat at this table at 15 and told me about her day without editing it, who sometimes put her feet up on the chair beside her when she thought I wasn't paying attention, who used to ask my opinion on things and then actually wait for the answer. I did not raise the application. I did not bring it anywhere near the surface of the evening. It was not my move to make, and I had made the only move I was going to make, and what came after was not something I was going to engineer. Lou helped clear the plates without being asked. He has always done this, without ceremony, without a particular gesture toward being noticed, just quietly picking up dishes and carrying them to the sink. Gerald used to do this too. I don't know what it means except that some men understand that a meal is not finished when the eating stops. He stood at the sink while I cut the remaining apple cake and wrapped it for Carol to take home, and from the corner of my eye, I could see that he was washing a pan he didn't have to wash, had filled the sink with soap and water without a thought, and his back was to the room. And there was something in the angle of his shoulders that had nothing to do with the pan. He was managing something. He was very quietly managing something and keeping it away from the evening, and that is a thing I recognized because I had been doing the same thing since October. What came next, I did not engineer. I need to say this, and I need you to believe it, because it matters to me for reasons I cannot fully articulate except to say that I am a person who has been inside enough institutional processes to know the difference between helping one run and making one run differently for your own ends. I did not make calls beyond the one call I made to Patricia. I did not speak to anyone in any capacity that drew on my former professional relationships. I did not ask anyone to expedite anything or pay particular attention to anything. I submitted a factual statement about my own name on a particular date. I did not add to it. I did not embellish it. I did not call in any of the 33 years of context that I could theoretically have called in. I simply told the truth and stepped back. The bank did what the bank does. It was a Friday in the first real cold week of November. The kind of cold that gets under doors and finds the gaps around window frames you thought were sealed when the second call came. Not from Derek, from a woman named Andrea in First Federal's compliance office, and her voice was measured in the way that compliance voices are always measured, very precise, very careful, not unkind, but calibrated to convey exactly what it needs to convey, and nothing additional. She told me that the verification process on the application in question had surfaced a discrepancy in the co-signer documentation. She said, handwriting review. Those exact words, the same words I had used with customers in situations like this when I needed to be accurate without creating alarm, had identified the signature on the application as inconsistent with reference samples from my account records at First Federal. "I want to confirm," she said, "that you have already submitted a written statement to our compliance inbox indicating you did not authorize this application." "I did," I said. "October 23rd at 9:17 in the morning. Yes, we have that on file." A brief pause, precise in its length. "Mrs. Renner, this application is now in formal review status. I want you to know that you have no obligation to take any additional action at this time. The discrepancy is being addressed through our own process." "I understand your process," I said. "I was a loan officer at First Federal for 33 years. The pause this time was different, a different quality to it, something settling. "Yes," Andrea said. "I see that in the file." "I assumed you would," I said. She told me the next steps. The application would be suspended while the review was complete. Written notification would go to all parties on the application. The applicants would be contacted and informed of the review findings. Any determination about further action, she was careful here, precise, the way compliance people are always careful about the distinction between process steps and outcomes, would be made at a level above her own, and she could not speak to the timeline. I asked her to document the call with time and her name in the file. She said she would. She said it the way someone says something when they already know they were going to do it. I thanked her, and I set the phone down. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. The furnace was running, and the house was warm. Outside the window over the sink, the November light was coming in thin and clear, the kind of winter light that doesn't warm anything but illuminates everything, every small mark and water ring, and place on the counter, where something happened once. The soap dish beside the sink had a hairline crack along the rim that I'd been meaning to replace for a year and a half. The window glass had a smear at the lower left corner from a cardinal that had flown into it in August and scared me badly before I realized it had shaken itself off and flown away unhurt. I thought about Kendra opening the letter from First Federal. I had not let myself think about it directly until that moment. It is a thing I know how to do, the way professionals in certain fields learn to do it, to keep the mechanism separate from the face, to think about the process without thinking about the person the process is happening to. I had done it across a desk for 33 years, with varying degrees of success, and I had become better at it than was probably healthy. But it had been necessary, and I had used it again here. But sitting in the November kitchen with the furnace running and the thin light coming in the window, I thought about her hands on the envelope, the way she opens mail, her thumbnail along the top edge, one clean motion, the way she's done it since she was old enough to have her own mail, the way her face goes very still when she reads something unexpected, a stillness that sits just before comprehension, in that small fraction of a second when the information has arrived, but the meaning of it has not. I have watched that face since it was new. I know all its variations. I was not glad. I am saying this plainly, and I want you to hear it without qualification. There was no gladness in what I was feeling. There was something else that does not have a name I like, something that felt like a dislocated joint returned to the socket. Not comfortable, not pleasant, but correct. The sensation of a thing being where it is supposed to be. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, I learned later. I know it was a Tuesday because that is when Kendra called, and she did not call at her usual time between 6 and 7. She called at 11 in the morning, on a work day, which meant she had not been at work or had left it, and her voice when I answered had lost all of its careful engineering. It was just her voice, the one underneath the performed one, the one she uses when something has happened that is larger than her ability to manage it in real time. "I need to come over," she said. "All right," I said. "Lou's coming too." "All right," I said. She arrived just after 1. Lou's truck was in the driveway, and they came in through the back door the way they always do, the way Kendra has since she was old enough to reach the latch, and they stood in my kitchen in their coats, and Kendra looked at me, and Lou looked at the floor, and I told them to sit down, and I put the kettle on because that is what you do. The letter was on the table between us. Kendra had brought it. It was folded in thirds, in the way that institutional letters are always folded, with a precision that is slightly inhuman, that no person folds a letter on purpose, and First Federal Savings and Loan was in the return address at the upper left corner. I did not reach for it. I did not need to read it. I already knew what was in it. Kendra looked at me for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. She has Gerald's jaw, the same line, The same held quality when she's trying not to let something show. It used to stop me when Kendra was a teenager and angry at me. The way Gerald's face would appear in hers at those moments, superimposed, a reminder that some things transmit without meaning to. "Did you report us?" she said. "I reported a discrepancy in my own name," I said. "The bank found what the bank found." She held my eyes. "You knew. When did you know?" "The day they called for verification." Something moved through her face that was not one thing. It was several things at once, and I am not going to name them because they are hers, not mine. "We were going to tell you," she said. "We were going to pay it back before you even, once the business was running, once the first few clients were settled, we were going to come to you and say, 'Kendra,'" just her name, quietly. She stopped. Lou said, from somewhere slightly back from the center of the conversation, his voice low and deliberate, "She's right, Kendra. We should have asked. He said it the way a person says something they have been carrying since before they decided to go ahead with it anyway. That is the specific sound of someone who has arrived at the same conclusion they had on the front end and managed to override. I recognized it. I'd heard it across a desk many times. It always sounds the same." Kendra's face changed in a way I could see but couldn't have described, and she set her hands flat on the table and looked at them. "I knew you'd say no," she said. "You didn't ask." "I knew you'd say no." She said it again, not as argument, but the way you say something when it is the truest thing you have. "Because of the risk profile. Because you would have wanted to see 3 years of projections and collateral details and a market study. And I didn't have all of that yet. And I couldn't wait for all of that. Lou had a client ready to commit. The studio space was available right then, and the landlord wasn't going to hold it." "You didn't ask," I said. "That's the only thing I have to say about the decision." She looked up from her hands. "I would have wanted to be asked, oh," I said. "That is all I would have wanted." The kettle began to sound, the low whistle that this particular kettle makes before it builds to the full sound, and I got up and made the tea. 3 mugs, the ceramic ones from the second shelf, the ones with the small chips on the handles that I've accumulated over 15 years of daily use. I set one in front of Kendra and one in front of Lou, and I sat back down with mine, and I wrapped both hands around it because my hands had been cold since morning, and the ceramic was warm. The steam came up slowly between us. Outside, a car went by on the street, and somewhere in the neighborhood someone was running a leaf blower, and those ordinary sounds were the whole surround of that moment. Lou picked up his mug. He did not drink from it. He held it the way people hold warm things when they need something to hold, and he looked at the table rather than at me. And then he said, "We owe you an apology. I owe you an apology. What we did was wrong. It was wrong when I agreed to it, and it was wrong when we did it, and I have been knowing it was wrong since June." He paused. "I don't have a way to make that into something better than what it is." Kendra was crying quietly. I noticed it the way you notice things at the edge of your attention when you are holding the center of it steady. She was not crying the way people cry when they want to be seen crying. She was crying the way she cries when she is genuinely ashamed of something. Very quietly, looking somewhere past me at the window, not performing it at all, just experiencing it in a minimal way, as if she is trying to take up as little space as possible while she does. She has always cried this way. When she was 11 and broke my reading glasses and hid them under the couch and I found them, she cried exactly like this. Not when I found them, later, when she understood not just that she'd been caught, but that she'd done the thing. I did not move toward her. Not yet. Not because I didn't want to. Because there was something I needed to say while she could hear it as a thing I was saying and not as a comfort. "I am going to help you," I said. They both looked up. "Not with the loan, not the way you went looking for help, but I am going to help you build what you should have brought to me 4 months ago. A proper business plan, with numbers in it that mean something, with projections that could survive a second pair of eyes, with the things a real underwriter looks for. Because I know what those things are, and I will tell you, and you could learn them. And if you learn them, you won't need me to vouch for you to any institution. You'll be able to stand in front of any lender and speak for yourselves." I looked at them both. That help I am glad to give. I would have given it in June if anyone had let me." Lou looked at me. He set his mug down on the table, on Gerald's table, carefully. He cleared his throat once. "Why?" Kendra said. "Not an argument. Genuine." "Because you're my daughter," I said. "And because the idea is a good one. Lou has real talent, and you have real sense, and together you have something stronger than most applications I reviewed in 30 years. That is an honest assessment. I'm giving it to you because it's true." She looked at me for a long moment. The crying had stopped. She looked worn and very young. "The bank," she started. "The bank's process runs its course," I said. "I can't speak to what they determine. That is not mine. But after, when that is settled, one way or another, you come back to this table with your numbers and we start again from the beginning. Clean." She looked at me for another moment. Something in her face shifted that I am not going to try to name either. "You knew from the first phone call," she said. "Yes," I said, "and you just waited." "I know how these processes move," I said. "I know what they find and when they find it. I didn't need to rush anything." A silence. Lou turned his mug in a slow circle on the table. Kendra looked out the window. "What would you have done," she said, "if we had just asked? In June? If we'd sat at this table and asked?" I thought about it honestly. I held the question where it deserved to be held. "I would have asked for the business plan and the projections," I said. "I would have taken a week with it. I would have come back with questions. Would you have said yes?" "I don't know," I said. "Honestly. It would have depended on the answers." She nodded very slowly, the way you nod when you have suspected something for a long time and just heard it confirmed. "That's why," she said. "I know," I said. We sat with that for a moment, the three of us and the tea going slightly cool, and the leaf blower outside silencing itself abruptly in the way they do, so the neighborhood went suddenly and completely quiet. "I'm sorry," Kendra said. She said it simply, without decoration. "I know," I said. Lou said it too, quietly, a moment later. I nodded. I did not make it into more than what it was, because what it was enough. There are things that passed between the three of us over the months that followed that are not for telling here. The bank's determination came through in December. There were consequences, not criminal. First Federal made its determination about that threshold, and the result was not a referral. I do not know the full basis for that determination, and I did not ask, because I had said I was not lodging a complaint, and I meant it. But there were financial consequences. There was a mark on an application record. There was a conversation that Kendra and Lou had to have with an institution about a discrepancy in a document with their name on it, and they had to have it without me in the room, because it was theirs to have, and I am told it was not a short or comfortable conversation. I know this from Kendra's face the evening she came over afterward. A Tuesday in December, early dark, the weather the gray-brown of late fall gone fully to winter. When she sat at my kitchen table and drank tea and told me the summary of it briefly, and then we talked about other things. The business plan arrived at my table in February on a Saturday, when the snow was falling in the soft, uncommitted way it does when it's not sure yet how serious it is. The flakes that fall straight down without wind, that don't accumulate immediately, but suggest they might. Lou had done the financial projections himself, from a template I had described to them over the phone and a library book on small business accounting that he had checked out and apparently read carefully because the projections were organized in a way that showed he understood what they were for and not just how to fill in the categories. They were not perfect. A few of the growth assumptions were optimistic in the way that first-time business owners' assumptions tend to be, and I made pencil marks next to those with questions. But the structure was sound. The honesty was evident. A professional reviewer would see these two things. Kendra had written the market analysis, and it was sharp in the way her thinking is sharp when she is fully engaged with something. She had researched 3 competitors in the area, identified a gap in the mid-range branding market that neither the large agencies nor the solo freelancers were filling well, and laid out a positioning strategy that was specific enough to be believable. She sees angles, like her father, not straight at a problem, but from the side of it, at the angle nobody else thought to look from. Gerald would have been proud of that. I thought about that while I read it. Carol was there, as it happened. She had come over for the morning and stayed. because the snow was continuing, and because she recognized that what was happening at the kitchen table was something she could be useful at the edge of without being in the center of, which is a social skill that I have always admired in her. She sat at the far end of the table with her book and her tea, and she did not interrupt once for 3 hours, which is a considerable act of restraint from a woman who has opinions about most things and generally considers it her social obligation to share them. We went through the plan line by line. I used a pencil, which I'd chosen deliberately over the red pen I keep in the kitchen drawer. Pencil marks come out. I was not marking this up as a rejection. I was marking it as the first draft of something worth making into a better draft. By noon, we had identified 3 sections that needed strengthening. By early afternoon, those sections had been talked through enough that Lou had notes and Kendra had notes, and between the 2 of them, they had a path to the revision. By mid-afternoon, we had a plan that I believed in, not as a guarantee. I don't make guarantees, and I wouldn't make one to my own daughter any more than I would to a stranger, but as a foundation, as something a careful lender could look at and see the honest outlines of people who had done their work. I told them which community development lenders had the most appetite for exactly this kind of business at this stage. I told them what documentation to have prepared and how to organize it. I told them that the first no they received was information, not a verdict, and to treat it as such. Kendra wrote everything in the narrow notebook with the green cover that she has carried since the Hendricks group, bent over it with her fountain pen, not looking up, her best concentration, the concentration she's had since she was studying for finals in high school, requiring that her eyes be pointed somewhere neutral while her mind is fully occupied. Lou asked me, in a moment while Kendra was in the other room, "Did you think about not helping, after everything?" I considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. "No," I said. "I thought about what helping meant. That took some time, but not whether." He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table, something I had seen him do before in this kitchen. "I want you to know that I understand what you could have done, that you had other options." "Lou," I said. He looked at me. "Clean slate means clean," I said. "Bring the best business you can build. We won't revisit the rest." He nodded once. He picked up his coffee and drank it. His jaw moved once. He looked at the table and then out the window, where the snow had slowed to almost nothing and the backyard was just barely white. "I am going to tell you the last thing that I need to tell you, and then I am going to let you sit with it." 3 months after that February Saturday, Renner Callaway Creative Partners received a small business development loan from a regional community lender at a rate I considered fair given the stage of the business and the documentation package they submitted. The studio space on Carver Avenue was no longer available by then, but there was a smaller space 2 blocks over, on the 2nd floor of a building that had been a bookstore for 30 years and still smelled faintly of paper and old wood. And Lou said that when he stood in it the first time, he felt like the ceiling was the right height for the kind of work he wanted to do. I thought that was a reasonable thing to know about a space before you committed to it. We had Sunday dinner last week, the 4 of us, and Carol. Lou brought wine. He poured it in the same order he's been pouring it since November, a small ceremony that no one has ever commented on, and that I have no intention of commenting on. Kendra made bread, which she has been doing for several months now. She said she had taken it up because she needed something that required her to slow down and wait, and bread requires both of those things. It was good bread, dense where it should be, with a crust that broke with the right sound when you pulled it apart. We talked about Carol's book club and Lou's new client, a regional chain of physical therapy practices that needed a full rebrand, a significant account, the kind that changes the trajectory of a young business, and about a film Kendra had seen and whether it was worth the time, and about the Henderson fence, which had been resolved to no one's satisfaction but everyone's exhaustion. We talked the way families talk when they have come through something and are choosing, together and without announcing it, to be on the other side of it. At some point, near the end of the meal, Kendra looked at me from across Gerald's table, while Lou and Carol were discussing something about the film I hadn't seen, and she gave me the look she gives me when she does not have words and knows it. She has given me this look since she was 15 or 16, at the moments in her life that were bigger than sentences. I have never fully known how to return it. I am too much a person of language, too much a person whose first instinct is to reach for the accurate word. But I held her eyes for a moment, a few seconds before I turned back to the bread in my hand. I think it was enough. I believe it was enough. Here is what I want to say to you now, if you are still here. If you have sat with this long, it is because something in this room exists somewhere in your memory, or in the life you are currently living, or in the life you can see coming from where you are standing. A table, a document, a person who loves you and has benefited from what you know and decided that what you know was less important than what they needed. That is not a story particular to my family. I think you know that. I think that is part of why you're still watching. What I want to say is about the paper trail, though not in the way you might expect. The paper trail is not a weapon. I did not build one as a weapon. I kept records because I am a person who keeps records, because I was trained to understand that documents are protection for everyone involved, not just for the institution, and because I had spent 33 years watching memory prove unreliable when money entered a situation. The records I kept were not strategic. They were habitual. They were the natural accumulation of a life lived by a person who understood what things are for. And what I want you to hear is this. You have a paper trail too. You have been building one your entire life without knowing it. Not in a file box necessarily, not in the formal way that my career made convenient, but you have been writing yourself down for decades, in the ways you handle things, in the decisions you make and how you make them, in what you know and where you learned it, in the particular motion behind whatever your version of the signature is. No one can reproduce that. They can copy the shape of it. They cannot reproduce the motion. The motion is the whole of it, and the motion is only made by living the life that made it. My daughter thought the quiet was emptiness. I understand why. Quiet, in the lives of women of a certain generation, of a certain position in a household, was often emptiness, was often the absence of options, the absence of authority, the absence of anyone asking. I understand why a child growing up in proximity to that would come to read the quiet that way, even when it was something else, even when it was patience, even when it was someone who had simply stopped needing to announce what she held. The assumption that the underestimated woman will absorb the harm to protect the people she loves is not a random one. It has been correct across enough households, across enough generations, that it has calcified into expectation. I do not say this to condemn anyone. I have made this bargain myself in smaller ways, across a long life, because it seemed cheaper than the alternative, and because I loved the people involved, and because the world I lived in for most of my life made it rational. But I am 70 years old, and I stopped making that bargain around the time Gerald died, not because his death changed me in some dramatic story arc way, but because his absence removed the last structural reason. I had to absorb things that were not mine to absorb. He was not someone who asked me to absorb things. That is not why. He was simply someone whose presence had organized my life in a way that included, among many good things, a set of buffers between me and the full responsibility of being entirely myself. When the buffers went, what remained was someone who had spent 33 years building up a body of knowledge and record that nobody had thought to account for, because they had spent too long looking at me across the dinner table to understand that dinner tables are also, sometimes, conference tables. You can forge a name. You can spend a careful hour with a piece of paper and a signature you have watched for years across birthday cards and permission slips and the backs of checks, and you can reproduce the shape of it well enough to pass a casual inspection, and you can tell yourself that you will fix it later, will repay it later, will make it right later, and the later in that sentence will feel real because you need it to feel real. But the 40 years of handwriting behind it, the accumulation of every document ever signed in a particular way, by a particular hand, with a particular motion that developed without intention across a particular life, that you cannot forge. Not because the signature is complicated, because you haven't had the time to become the person who makes it. I have had the time. That is all I had. That is the only thing I used. The card I held was not a secret. It was not a scheme. It was simply the careful and complete record of who I am, assembled over 70 years, available to anyone who looked at it honestly, which is exactly what First Federal Savings and Loan was required to do. I set the stock on low that evening in October, and I turned off the kitchen light at 9:30, and I went to bed. And I lay in the dark of Gerald's house, and I knew that everything I needed was already in a file box inside a cedar chest at the foot of my bed, and that I had not planned for this moment, had never imagined I would need to, and that it had been ready anyway. That is what a life of attention makes. That is the only thing it makes. That is enough.